Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by Gerry Hamilton and CJ Vogel. It's time for this week's State of the Program, brought to you by our friend Adam Lowy at the Lowy Law Firm. Guys, Longhorns have upstart Vanderbilt this coming weekend. We want to preview that in this week's State of the Program, and not really preview it as much as kind of give our thoughts on a couple of different pieces here. One is, the injury bug that's hit Texas, not only at running back early in the season, but now at safety. There's some clear issues there that Texas is going to have to manage this weekend in Nashville. And then also the situation at quarterback. I mean, I want to ask you guys and give y'all have y'all give your thoughts on how long should the leash be for Quinn Ewers? I mean, is it long? Is it short? What do y'all think? And then we'll go from there. Also talk a little bit about recruiting Longhorns after this weekend's game against Vanderbilt. Coaches will be able to get on the road the next week with a bye week. So we'll be talking and looking a little bit more in depth at recruiting at that point. All right, let's start with the injury situation, if you guys don't mind. Trey Wisner went out, so we know that he went direct to the locker room before the game was over. But CJ, you're reporting that he was in a green jersey earlier this week. That's along with a Jarrett Gibson that's available and Jaden Blue. So Longhorns have 3 scholarship running backs. We don't know how dinged up Trey Wisner is, if he'll be able to play this weekend or not, but it's something we're monitoring. But really, the one that we are really thinking about now is safety, where Andrew Makuba, who has started every game this year, is now out because of a knee injury that happened on Saturday. Jelani McDonald, according to Steve Sarkisian, is likely to step into that starting role along with Michael Taft. That means only one that's next up after that is Jordan Johnson-Rubel, possibly Jahdae Barron in that role. CJ, I'm going to start with you and ask you about that safety spot and how you see that shaking out for the Longhorns this weekend.
Yeah, well, it's tremendous news that Andrew Makuba is week to week right now. For those that watch the highlight or watch that replay of his knee and the way that it kind of bent and twisted, very fortunately not to lose him for the entire season if you're the University of Texas. Texas, of course, having that bye week after Vanderbilt allows them to double up on rest and recovery for Andrew Makuba. And with no more Derek Williams this year, that room is getting thinner, right? And you would like to be as close to full strength as you can be for the final stretch, which includes road games to Arkansas and Texas A&M. If you can get Andrew Makuba as close to healthy as possible, and if that means not playing against Vanderbilt, I think that's the best route. That does mean you're going to see Jordan Johnson-Rubel into the rotation. You could potentially see Jahdae Barron bump back there. Sarkisian mentioned that on Monday as a possibility. Of course, that versatility is one of the biggest strengths of Jahdae's game. And of course, that corner room has some pieces that, at least depth-wise, you can throw in onto the field. But right now, it's going to be a heavy set of Michael Taft, who did not come off the field for a single snap against Georgia, and Jelani McDonald, who over the last 2 weeks has been setting career highs in snaps over the last 2 weeks. So those are going to be the two guys, with Jordan Johnson-Rubel and some Jahdae Barron filtered in as well.
And Gerry, how would you play that? I was going to ask you, Gerry, how would you play that?
Well, what that means to me, too, is twofold. Remember how much nickel McDonald played against Michigan. So they can't get Gilbo off the field for any snaps right now, any break. He's got to be a full game type of guy right now because the injuries at safety. So that affects the rotation as well. So Jahdae Barron, if he's playing corner, bumps back to safety. I'm not saying if he does. Him and Gilbo are going to play. You can't take those guys off the field anymore. That's what this really does. I think you're okay at safety in this game. But again, Jalen Gilbo, you got to play every snap now. You can't afford to really rotate Jelani McDonald down the nickel and give Gilbo a breather right now. That's the thing, is how this affects everything. I mean, look, I don't think Vanderbilt, and I know perimeter tackling against the run, but Vanderbilt doesn't have the receivers that are just going to tear you apart, so to speak. They're good quality players, but the tight end's their focal point. So you can play Barron at some safety in this game if you want and be okay at corner. I do believe that. Look, if Gavin Holmes is a fourth-year player, if he's not ready to come on and play the run now, he's never going to be. I mean, so that's what I would say to that. But it's really how it affects that whole rotation. And then you have Jordan Johnson-Rebel, who, look, he's a mature kid. He's got the football intelligence piece of it, and he's having to grow up in a hurry now.
I'll tell you the one that I think they could tinker with, given that it's a run-heavy set, guys. They could put in a big nickel package and use a guy like Mo Blackwell in that nickel role. I would not be entirely surprised by that. So whether it's pushing Barron over to safety or to nickel and giving Gilbo a rest if something happens there, they've got a couple of different pieces they can tinker with a little bit that aren't necessarily what you would think out of the gate. Like, you don't think of Jahdae Barron right now playing any safety, although Sark mentioned it on Monday. You don't really think that you're going to see Mo Blackwell at a big nickel, but something that they may need to use, especially against a run-heavy, time of possession seeking team like Vanderbilt. So those injuries in the secondary are mounting and causing that. I also want to go back to running back. Jerry, you made a point on Coffee and Football that you think this could be a big game for Jarrett Gibson, the big bowling ball of a running back out of IMG. Why do you think that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know about big game, but I just think it's a game they can play him in. Because, look, Vanderbilt, unless you just have busts, Vanderbilt's not the same level pass rushing team as Oklahoma and Georgia. And I think pass pro is a concern. But also in the run game, I think Texas is going to have to establish a run game more so. And I think Jarrett Gibson will have some opportunities against this defense. I think this is a good Jarrett Gibson game to get him back in the flow. You know, look, the one thing about him, he'd been limping around too. He'd had an ankle issue. So not playing for 2 weeks, he should be fully healed and ready to go. If something happens with Trey Wisner and he can't go, I do think Jarrett Gibson will step up and deliver in the run game for Texas against Vanderbilt. I think it's a good game for Jarrett Gibson.
Hey, CJ, I wanted to ask you. Thanks, Jerry. I want to ask you, CJ, you're the one that reported Wisner was in a green jersey. We'll know later tonight at around 7 o'clock when Steve Sarkisian and Texas release their official injury report, exactly what their term is. But, you know, what are you hearing as far as a running back position right now for Texas? Do you think Texas is going to have all three available this weekend?
I think it remains to be seen just to see how much he progresses. You know, it's a positive sign that he's on the practice field, right? To not be in a contact uniform, right? To be in that green jersey, very cautious in my eyes. And again, you have a double up opportunity to rest. Now, what was very telling to me about the Georgia game is the snap count for Blue and Wisner. As heavily favored Wisner we've seen the entire year, 14 carries to 0. I know the touches for Blue all came out of the backfield, but that tells you where the confidence and where the trust is right now in the backfield, and that's all on the shoulders of Trey Wisner. I think that they're going to want him to be on the field, but when you look towards the big games remaining, you can certainly beat Vanderbilt without Trey Wisner. And if that's the case, I think you look at it in the sense that, you know, you got 2 weeks to get fully healthy and get ready for phase 3 of this season. You need to be fully healthy for that final stretch, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him on a very limited snap count or not play at all.
I hope he does play because I do not like the idea right now, guys, of Texas going into a situation where they're sitting there worried about who they can bring in to the game and who they have to keep out, especially when you have a team in Vanderbilt that's really, really hot right now. I mean, look, you're going to have to score points in this game. I guarantee it. And they need everything they've got. All right. Next conversation is going to be about Quinn Ewers and what kind of leash do you give the incumbent quarterback at the University of Texas? But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Adam Lowy, the Lowy Law Firm. You've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, automobile accident of any kind. Make sure you give Adam and his firm a chance to earn your business. Give them a call. It's a free, no strings attached consultation. LowyLawFirm.com. Adam and his group have 20 plus years of experience of serving their clients. Appreciate Adam and his sponsorship. All right, guys. Quinn Ewers, Longhorns in the last 20 regular season games are 18-2. Quinn Ewers as a starter at Texas has brought Texas back from the Netherlands, so to speak, and made them nationally relevant. At the same time, his last 2 games have been stinkers. I mean, no two ways about it. So I've got to ask y'all, where is it with Steve Sarkisian right now? Short leash, long leash? What is the leash? In y'all's opinion, based on what y'all are hearing and thinking right now. Jerry, you look like you're ready to go. What do you want to talk about? What do you want to say?
Well, yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see. I think I would think the first quarter and a half of this game are going to be very key for Quinn. You know, depending on how the game goes, what if Vanderbilt gets the ball and they go 7 minutes and get a field goal or something, and half the first quarter's gone? So a lot could depend on how many possessions there are and how does he look in those possessions. But I'm thinking the first quarter and a half is going to be really big for Quinn because not only does Sark need to see the confidence from Quinn again, Kelvin Banks does. Hayden Connor does.
Yeah.
The whole team. What do you think, CJ?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you got to find some points. You got to find a way to start hot. It hasn't been the case for Texas over the last 2 weeks. And again, this is the hypothetical game that I hate playing when it comes to quarterbacks, and because they get the brunt of everything that goes bad, and they get the praise unnecessarily at times when things go well. And for Quinn in this game, you've got to find some points. You got to have multiple scores in the first quarter and a half. You got to just have something on the board. And that Georgia game, the second half, I think for the most part, if you were to tell me Quinn Ewers was 19 of 31 for 2 touchdowns and 194 yards in the second half against Georgia, I would have sat here and said, hell yeah, that's a heck of a performance. But we saw what happened when he didn't start quickly. And does he get pulled if that opponent isn't Georgia and the stakes are as high as they were? Maybe not. Why do I say that? Because he didn't get pulled against Oklahoma the week before, looking very similar to what he was. So that's kind of where this entire conversation has stemmed from, is because it was Georgia, because it was on national television, it was a top 5 matchup. Well, now you got a quarterback controversy. I don't think that to be the case. 3 turnovers, how many of them were really his fault? I think you could debate maybe 0. That's part of the game of football. It takes 11 to be really good. It takes 11 to fumble a little bit. And right now, I think that there's a much larger burden on Quinn's shoulders than maybe is warranted, but he's a talented football player. I think you give him the first half, expect that to go well, and if it doesn't, well, then you reevaluate at halftime.
So CJ, you're basically saying that. I would argue that Quinn could have turned the ball over 5 times, and he's lucky it was only 3.
No, he could. Yeah, absolutely. He could have had a couple catches down there, and that didn't go that way.
You're saying you give him a full half, Jerry. You're saying a quarter and a half. I could see either or. I think you got to give, if you're going to eventually go with Arch, and you think you might, you need to give him the ball at the end of the first half at least to get his feet wet. So I think I'm kind of with Jerry there. If this does happen, here's where I want to go with it though a little bit and really discuss it. What are the parameters by which Sark makes that decision? Is it just simply points scored, the situation in the game? What if Texas is up 14-10, but looked really mediocre on offense? I mean, CJ, you had a stat that I thought was really impressive. That's on a per possession basis, Vanderbilt is giving up as many points as just about anybody in the country right now.
Yes,
on their defense. And so, what does 14-10 really mean if Texas is winning? That's not necessarily. You would think that may not be a good performance by the quarterback, is what I'm saying. But are you still going to hand the reins to somebody else? How does he evaluate it? Well, certainly there's going to be a nuance to it of how he feels about the game and what he's seeing on the field. But I think there are a couple of clues that he gave us in Monday's press conference. He talked about third down efficiency and how that's got to get better. They got to stay ahead of the chains. That means not taking sacks. That means getting rid of the ball on time. Quinn takes sacks that don't need to happen, doesn't get rid of the ball quickly and move the chains, and isn't effective on third down to extend drives and keep it out of Vanderbilt's hands. I think that's what those are the things we're going to see beyond just points and whether or not they're winning or losing the game. They're going to
I'm looking for one thing early in this game. He needs to have the feet of a tennis player. His feet need to be moving with purpose. and quicker than they have been the last 2 games. If his feet are not moving with any more purpose and a little bit of desperation in terms of not desperation of your job, desperation to fight back, there's going to be an issue. Athletes have to your feet have to move. It does not matter what happens after that. It won't happen well. If your feet are behind everything you see, it doesn't matter. You can, even if you feel the pressure and your feet don't move, doesn't matter. He needs to have the feet of a tennis player Saturday if he's going to rebound. If he doesn't, it's going to be long. It's going to be tough for him.
CJ, what do you think Sark will kind of base it on?
It's got to be feel of the offense, because there's no telling if you get 3 possessions in the first half. There's no telling if you get 6 possessions in the first half. And so if you base it off of points alone, I think it's, it can be a variable that doesn't need to be as inconsistent as what we think coming into the game. Vanderbilt wants to play the same style of football that Mississippi State played, and we saw them succeed early in that first half. If they do that, go on those multiple 7 or 8 minute drives offensively, well, then that goes an entire quarter, and you're putting up Quinn against unrealistic or that offense really against unrealistic expectations. And I think that's a bit unfair. It's got to be feel. Are they converting? Are they staying ahead of the chains? Are they putting themselves in positions to score points? That's the ultimate job of a quarterback. Protect the football, put your team in a position to score points. It doesn't always have to be you running the football in or throwing a ball. You got a running back, you got an offensive line, you got playmakers around you. Just make sure that you're protecting the ball and making the right reads down the field. Again, Monday night, we watched Justin Herbert throw for 360 and no touchdowns. They kicked 5 field goals and they lost. Is he to blame? I don't think so. But that's kind of what the job of the quarterback is. Protect the football, put your teams in a position to score points. And that's what Quinn has to do on Saturday.
Boy, I think protecting the football, you could put that down there, right up there with third down efficiency and not getting behind the chains. Clearly, and Sark mentioned that as well. So I think y'all are both on.
Can I say this? And I don't disagree with CJ, but here's where it gets tough for a quarterback that's struggling. There's a fine line between protecting the football and holding the football. You have to still be willing to let it go, even if that's the thing. If you throw an interception and it was a tight window, but it was the right read at the time, it's a fine line, man. I mean, like if he holds the ball, I'm not sure that's just to protect the football. I think you saw that against Oklahoma after the rough start. I think it was hold the ball leads to indecision. And if you play with indecision, man, it's a tough position to play, in my opinion. You got to let it go. You got to let it go.
Yeah, on the flip side, I mean, if he comes out and he looks like Carson Beck in the first half, it's no different. Right, that's the double-edged sword right there. Because if you go 56% with 3 picks and less than 200 yards passing, I mean, you're not going to have a job the next week. I like the idea of kicking, punting, ending every drive with a kick. And if that's the path that leads to Quinn Ewers playing more, that's the one that I think he has to take.
That's all fair. This is conjecture to some degree, but everything I hear is that this is a very tenuous situation. Sark showed against Georgia, he's not unwilling to make a change.
Right.
I mean, he uses the term all the time, meritocracy. This is a meritocracy. Quinn's performing, Quinn plays. Quinn's not performing, Quinn sits.
I would say this would be a good thing to end this on, looking ahead to next week. The last thing Steve Sarkisian wanted to do in the Georgia game was pull Quinn Ewers in year 3 in a massively big game with every NFL team represented at that game. Last thing Steve Sarkisian wanted to do to Quinn was pull him out of that game. That spoke a lot to me.
Yeah. Means if you're playing poorly, you're playing poorly. So, all right. That's what Sark gets paid for. Big decisions like that. All right. Going forward to recruiting, guys, here on State of the Program. Wanted to ask y'all did the recruiting breakdown yesterday. I caught it. A lot of things that are now just up in the air. We're waiting on Michael Terry. We're waiting on Javion Hilson. We're waiting on a couple of guys that are committed elsewhere, like a Dorian Brew, like a Chase Sims, like a Kelshawn Johnson. maybe a Malcolm Simpson, as well as other guys in Georgia like Walter Mathis. It seems, and Joseph Mbachu literally just decommitted from Florida on Monday. It seems like we're playing the waiting game a little bit right now as it relates to recruiting. Is that a fair assessment? Because it's National Signing Day. If they're going to come to school in January, that's coming up in less than 6 weeks now.
Yeah, about 45 days.
Well, yeah.
I mean, yes, it is. I mean, because all the kids still have visits. Nobody's canceled visits. I'm shutting this thing down. And you wouldn't expect them to this late in the game.
Right.
That's the thing. Now, will everybody stick to December 4th, 5th, or 6th? Whatever you want to call that day now, that remains to be seen. Javian Hilson saying, yeah, I am. Batu, yes, that's what I'm going to do. But we'll see if that all holds. Sometimes these guys get sick of the process when it gets into early November. We'll see. But that's the way all these remaining recruitments, that's the way they're going to play out. And honestly, and the big thing is then who else will Texas bring in for an official visit in November is the key. That's one of the big keys for me. Will they bring Chase Sims back for an official visit? Malcolm Simpson back for an official visit? Can they get Walter Mathis or Kevin Wynn in November? Madden Faramo, do they get him in November? Does
Riley Pettijohn maybe?
Riley was already, he already officially visited, so that's kind of the deal with him. But the guys that haven't been on campus in a while or they haven't officially visited, that's kind of going to be telling for the Florida game. And then, by Kentucky, you're just 12 days out from when you can, I guess. I don't even know what to call the day anymore. But so there's going to be a push to get these guys on campus. There's 2 game weekends left in November, and that's going to be an interesting thing. And then where do the coaches, depending on how many days they have on the road, because they're a little more restricted, how many coaches are out and where do they go next week in the off week? Well, I think will be telling as well, because that's not going to be as much of it'll be some because of where you go, but 2026 focused. I think that'll be really 25 focused on these guys that are remaining, that are top targets. And you'll see where these coaches kind of show up and pop up if it gets out. Will be telling of who they think they have a better chance with than maybe with some others.
I got a question for you, Jerry. You made mention on Coffee and Football that you thought a couple of guys were going to go do this in early November, and that maybe one of them might be Michael Terry, who's obviously still looking at other schools like Nebraska as well as Oregon. Anybody else you think might go a little bit earlier than December at this point other than Michael Terry?
Hard to say right now for me. Everybody's saying December, but we'll see. Of the guys who, like if somebody who's committed elsewhere, that may be a little bit of a different game. But again, that's almost easier for these kids to just do it on a signing day or something, right? When their process ends. If somebody said decommitted now and flipped their commitment, well, they still have to deal with more of that for another month on the recruiting side. That's why you see a lot of these kids wait until the night before signing day or signing day and make their flip and they're done. But again, what is signing day now? Who knows? But it's everybody's targeting December 4th, 5th, or 6th. And the only guy right now that I think, CJ, you heard the same thing with Michael Terry, is that's a potential in November.
Yeah, and that was one that began in December. And I think as this season schedule visits have progressed, you've seen that timeline get sped up just a little bit. Of course, he was on campus this past weekend. I think Texas still is that team to beat right now by a pretty healthy margin. But like you said, Jerry, it's almost like you're walking to the airport terminal, right? And you get to the gate, you go through TSA, and that's the entire season. And then you get out to that long corridor and you just get on the little Segway. And it takes you all the way to signing day. And that's where you skip basically all of that extra time that we're seeing from like week 6 to the end of the season. And that's basically where we end up with signing day being that kind of end-all, be-all decision day.
I got to ask y'all, let's flip this a little bit. And are there any guys out there you think that are committed to Texas that y'all are particularly concerned with about going elsewhere right now?
Not for me.
At the moment, no.
Okay. Thank you again to our sponsor, Adam Lowy of the Lowy Law Firm. Visit loweylawfirm.com if you've been injured in a car wreck, truck wreck, 18-wheeler, and you want a consultation to see if you might be due compensation. loweylawfirm.com. Thanks again, Adam, and his group for their sponsorship of State of the Program and On Texas Football. All right, for CJ Vogel and Gerry Hamilton, I'm Bobby Burton. It's going to be this episode of State of the Program. Hook 'em.